Welcome to Conversation with a Geographer. I'm Mike DeVivo, Professor of Geography here at Grand Rapids Community College. And today we have Lindsay Naylor, Assistant Professor of Geography at the University of Delaware. Lindsay, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm very excited to be here.
Well, it's great that you're here. You're going to be giving a talk tonight. And as I start out most of these interviews, these Conversation with a Geographer interviews, I'm going to ask you about some sparks that captivated you into really pursuing geography as a career. Tell me, what started it all?
Well, that's such a good question because I came to geography by a really meandering route. My first degree in geography is my PhD. And so I hadn't taken any geography classes at the undergraduate or master's level. And I knew that I was interested in people and how benefits of being alive were distributed unevenly. You know, I was very interested in especially economic development. And I wanted to understand better why things were so different, for example, between the United States and Mexico. And I started having a conversation with a friend of mine who was doing a degree in geographic information systems, particularly education around maps. And he said, "You're speaking the same language as geographers, so you should check that out." So I went and took a cultural geography class. And at Portland State University.
In Portland?
Yes, yeah, I was in Oregon at the time. I was applying to PhD programs, and I went and took my first geography class. And I also took physical geography too, because I wanted to make sure that I could do the physical geography side. And I loved it. I just loved every moment of it. So that was the initial spark.
So you were captivated, and then you were drawn in at the University of Oregon.
Yes, yeah. So I applied to do my PhD at the University of Oregon, and I went to work with Lisa Nelson and Alec Murphy, and then eventually Dan Buck as well, to do my research, which is focused, or it had been focused, in southern Mexico. And so I got to start to think about those questions that brought me to geography in the first place, but I got to actually go to that place and be thinking about it. And so that was really exciting for me to have been thinking about Chiapas in particular since the late 90s, and then get to actually go for the first time in the late 2000s.
So had you been to Chiapas before?
No.
So you went to Chiapas thinking about the impact of NAFTA on Chiapas for a number of years, and you went there to engage in field work, never having gone there before.
Yes. Yeah, I was a little bit like the kid in the candy store on the plane. Yeah, I was very excited.
Oh, this is so cool. I'm going to Chiapas, you know?
Yeah, because I've been reading about this place and wondering, you know, what I was going to find for such a long time, that it was really nice to be given the opportunity to have a program invest in me as a researcher and as a thinker. And say, why don't you go see what you can find out, how people are interacting with this place and how changes that are coming from external powers are impacting them. And so that was really exciting for me.
But it can be. Can you explain perhaps on how you felt prepared before your journey to Chiapas?
You think I was prepared?
Well, you were walking on 2 feet and you were excited. You were thinking.
So I can't say enough nice things about the program at the University of Oregon and how it trains people to be researchers and to be professional geographers.
And it's a relatively small program as far as doctoral programs go.
Yeah, and so I had a nice cohort. You know, I came in with 13 other students. 5 of us were PhD students. And of the 5 of us, 4 did fieldwork. And of the 5 of us, I was the only one who did international fieldwork. And so it was really exciting to be able to exchange stories and things of that character. But I felt really well prepared because I had really good mentors. And so, you know, Lisa Nelson, who had done her work in Mexico, in Michoacan, you know, really prepared me for what it was going to be like to go into the field and to work with folks.
Which is a quite different area than Chiapas.
It is indeed. It is indeed. And then, you know, Alec Murphy as well, who, you know, has been to more states than most people who are operating for our government. And so he had very good advice about how to go into the field and how to prepare myself. And then you get there and, you make the best of what you've been given, and, it's not maybe what you'd expect, and you improvise.
So when you arrived in Chiapas, what were your preconceived notions? And how did they change?
Well, in terms of my research, or in terms of just being a human being going to a new place?
In terms of your research.
Well, I was particularly interested in how a group of folks who appeared to be very anti-globalization, very anti-NAFTA, and how they were harnessing a global marketplace, in this case, the fair trade certified marketplace, to sell coffee. How that maybe was a contradiction with what they were striving for as members of social movements. And I got there, and I realized that it wasn't a contradiction, that it was a strategy, that it was something that was very well thought out about how they wanted to interact with the marketplace and how they wanted to negotiate their relation with the market instead of having the market dictate to them how they should function. And so folks who have been farmers for generations and who've been farming the milpa, which is the corn, beans, and squash, and who wanted to stay on the land and who wanted to be subsistence farmers, were using coffee farming as a strategy to maintain their access to territory and to land, and also to maintain connections outside of Chiapas because they were in resistance and they wanted their story to be told and they wanted to continue to have solidarity relations outside of Chiapas. And so all of this was part of a strategy that was very well fitting with their resistance to how globalization was being done, not globalization itself. So who was benefiting from it?
It's interesting that you should bring that up, and especially with regard to that desire to maintain the milpa.
Yeah.
And it prompts this question. Did you get the impression, given the high level of indigeneity in southern Mexico, Chiapas in particular, compared to northern Mexico? Sauer commented on the two Mexicos. My goodness, 60, 80 years ago?
Yeah.
But besides that, did you get the impression that the milpa was, in a sense, a sacred space?
Yes, 100%. I think that without corn in particular, the identity of folks in a lot of these indigenous communities, and I don't want to generalize and say all indigenous communities because that would be anti-geographical.
But among the Tzotzil speaking
But yes, among the folks that I worked with who are Tzotzil speaking, corn is life. That's how it was described to me. And these folks are, by their own definition, campesinos, campesinas. They are peasant farmers, and they farm corn. And they farm corn to live. They farm corn because it's part of their identity for generations. They farm corn because they are the people of the corn. They literally embody that identity, either through their labor in the fields or through the actual act of eating the corn or preparing the tortillas or the tostadas. It is a part of everyday life in every sense of the way that they experience every day, to be redundant. But it is incredibly important. And to have that taken away or to have that be threatened is a threat to their identity and how they define themselves and who they are and how they've lived and how they want to live dignified lives through the farming.
It's very difficult for one in a developed country like the United States to understand. Why would these people not seek to advance themselves beyond engaging in this cultivation day in and day out on these rugged slopes of Chiapas? Did you hear any stories about any elements of agribusiness, corporate agriculture seeking to make inroads into Chiapas and the area that you were looking at?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Chiapas is surrounded by corporate agriculture, and not so much Corn, but there's a lot of palm, oil palm that's being planted in that area and is forcing people off their land as lands are consolidated. Oil palm is a really big encroachment on communal land and on farming of the milpa, and then cattle ranching. Those are the two big things that are being done either by large landholders or by corporate entities. And Chiapas is, again, a state that maybe we might look at from afar and say, this doesn't seem like a life we would want to live. But it's very much a life that people who are living there are trying to make better. And by making better, I don't mean that they want to have, everybody should be, as one of my informants, one of the people that I interviewed talked about, is like, everybody isn't going to be driving Subarus, right? That's not sustainable, planet-wide. But through their farming, through their interactions with the international marketplace, they are trying to take their lives and make them dignified, and they want to live well. And so sort of the threat of that being taken away, or the way that we describe Chiapas as being not, developed, is really damaging to that, because to point at what these folks are doing and saying that's not the right way to live is really limiting. And so when we see accounts of Chiapas, it's often talked about as being backward, even in government discourse in Mexico. And so the governor of Chiapas, when I was doing my research there, was talking about how they could pull Chiapas out of backwardness, and I find that really troubling, because it's not backward. It is a place that is full of life, and it is full of educated people who are trying to live out a particular life that we've pointed at and said, this isn't developed and therefore it's bad. When in fact it's been a very sustainable way to live for a really long time. And I think if you look at how we're living in the United States, I don't know if we'll be able to say that about our lifestyles in 100 years. If, oh yeah, that was totally sustainable, right? And so there's that juxtaposition that I think is really dangerous when we point at somewhere and we don't recognize that way of living, and so we don't think that it's the right way to participate in life.
And among those Highland Maya people, their cultural identity is so very important. They're not so willing to relinquish that identity like many others throughout parts of the world.
And I don't know that people have been readily willing, or if they've sort of been, there's sort of a forced assimilation that happens. And I don't mean to suggest in any way or romanticize what's happening in Chiapas, right? People are struggling. It is a struggle to live well. It is not a I'm going to go out and do the hard work of farming. It is an everyday struggle. And so I think instead of thinking about how they might assimilate or become urban people or to give up a peasant lifestyle, we could think more about how to make a peasant lifestyle, how to elevate a peasant lifestyle, right? And I think that that's happening in other places in the world. There's some really excellent research in Western Europe and in Eastern Europe about the re-peasantization of Europe, and about how people are leaving urban lifestyles and going back into the fields and adopting small-scale agriculture and small-scale production. And it's something that's sort of celebrated in the United States and Western Europe, but is demonized in places outside as a practice that needs to be kind of excised from these folks who obviously don't know better, and that's, again, I find that to be a really damaging discourse.
Can you comment on a day in your life in a Zapatista community?
Yeah, so... Yeah.
Conducting field work, you arrive, you're going into the hinterlands of Chiapas even. Yeah,
I mean, so I conducted research with two different groups. So I worked not with the Zapatistas exclusively and not with them in an official capacity, because they're under threat, they don't accept researchers, and they haven't approved research on their movement since 2000. 2002, 2003. Mariana Mora is the last person who had official permission. She wrote a fantastic book about the movement and on women's participation in the movement in particular, called Geopolitics. And so I was working, when I wanted to go into Zapatista communities, I essentially needed a hall pass. So every time I wanted to go and talk with folks in the coffee cooperatives, so I only was working with the coffee cooperatives, I would take a taxi to the administrative center of Oventique, which is a rebel autonomous governance area that's run by the Zapatistas. And I would present my passport at the gate, and they would walk away with my passport and go and make notes. And they knew I had been there before, and they would do whatever it is that they do in the building over there. And I would be granted permission to come in, or I would not. Most days I was able to come in, and I'd have an audience with the governing council, the Junta de Buen Gobierno, which is the Good Government Council. And I would talk with them about my intent. I would talk through my research with them. I would talk through my research questions. And then I often would submit my research questions for discussion among the governing council. And then they would connect me with the coffee cooperative or with the folks that I wanted to talk with. And so it might take me hours to get to where I was going. And that's not unusual for folks doing this kind of work. And I think that it's necessary, again, because Chiapas is one of the most studied places in Mexico, and especially for anthropological inquiry. And so instead of being a researcher that comes in and says, I want to do this, instead the way that it's negotiated is, I'm a researcher, how can I do this? And it really is a conversation and a dialogue with folks who are adherents to the Zapatista movement. So I did not work in particular with the movement, but with people who, as part of their everyday lives, are affiliated with the movement, and that makes up who they are. And so I was working with coffee farmers who were affiliated with the Zapatista movement. I was also working with coffee farmers who are affiliated with another movement called the Civil Society of the Bees, and they're a pacifist movement. They're in solidarity with the Zapatistas, and very differently from the Zapatistas, they were very open to having a researcher come in and talk about them and use the name of their cooperative and to have pictures taken and in ways that they didn't feel were threatening, which is very different for the Zapatistas, who were, did not want me to use the name of the cooperatives, were not interested in having me take pictures and so on and so forth, which I respected in my research. And so to go out to visit with Las Abejas, I would get in a taxi, and some of the most frightening taxi rides of my life every week for a few years, and go into the highlands. Oh, a lot of topes, which are the speed bumps in Chiapas, and they're everywhere. And some of them are that they were done by the municipality, they're official government topes, and some of them are citizen topes. A lot of topes, a lot of places where the road's just falling into the valley. But the taxi drivers, they know the terrain. They know it, so you're fine. So I would go up in the morning, and I would start at the bodega. I would start at the place where coffee is delivered, and I would meet with folks there. Sometimes I might just stay at the bodega all day and just talk with whoever was coming in to deliver their coffee, or talk with people who were visiting the little general store that they run. Other times I would leave from the bodega and I would go out into the fields of farmers, or I would go to their homes and enjoy a cup of coffee and talk through things. Other times I would meet with people in groups in the assembly room. And so a day in the life, there's not really one day that I can say looks the same. But as I was talking with your students yesterday, or with the students at Aquinas yesterday, research is not very predictable. And so it's a lot of waiting and watching and listening. And for me, above all, learning. Because I very much wanted to ask questions about autonomy and everyday life and farming practice, but I learned so much more than what I went there to find out. But yeah, it was hard.
It's interesting that your desire to engage in dialogue and develop an understanding came away with so much more fruit but of a different kind than what you intended to produce, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I had such a rich data set and I had such a rich experience being in these places and realizing that there's so much more than what we think. And to participate in that, even just for a little while, I will never have the full measure, you know. And so that's really humbling, and I like that about research, that it's never done. You know, I think that's why we continue to have to be curious and to find other sites of inquiry or the same site of inquiry in different ways. So going, you know, this research project I've been working on for a decade, and you know, I'm finishing it up now, which is really bittersweet. But I went to Chiapas multiple times over 3 years, and even just seeing how it changed over those 3 years was very, very different, and changed the way I was thinking about it.
Do you think you'll go back and conduct, for the purpose of conducting further field work?
I don't think that I will. I've always wanted to share Chiapas and to bring my students to the coffee cooperatives and to give students the opportunity to meet folks, because back when I started doing this research, people knew who the Zapatistas were, or at least had heard about the Zapatistas, or knew that there had been an uprising in Mexico following NAFTA. Last semester, I taught a course based on the social movements the folks that I'm working with are participating in, and it was to students who had never heard of these social movements before, had never heard of the Zapatistas, didn't know about the Abejas, the civil society of the bees. And so I've always wanted to go back with students to keep that memory of the unevenness of development, the unevenness of globalization, and how people are struggling to live well, fresh, and to hopefully inspire different ways of thinking about how people are living. But right now, and for a long time, it's not very safe there because these movements are under threat. And so there's a lot of paramilitary activity. There is a lot of actual military activity, and there's a lot of protest, peaceful protest. But right now, the government wants to build this highway through Chiapas and up into the Yucatan, and they want to build it through autonomous communities, and that's being protested, and people are being harmed through that protest, that peaceful protest. People are being threatened because they are trying to withstand the efforts of the government to remove them from the land. And so I don't feel like that is a good context to bring myself or my students back into at this time. So I don't have plans to go back as a researcher or as a scholar. I am very interested in going back as a US passport holder and as someone who has the possibility of being in solidarity, if that's something that would be desirable from the communities. Sometimes it's good to have people present and to witness. Other times it's not. It can be more damaging to have people there. And so that's a dialogue that I have with folks.
Well, and the government prohibits demonstration participation by foreigners, which is precarious as well.
Yeah.
It's difficult.
Yeah.
Let's talk about some of your other research.
All right.
You're examining various forms of agriculture in urban areas. You've just completed a piece on GMOs for the Geographical Review. There's really a lot of interesting stuff that you're doing.
Thanks. I mean, yeah, I love what I do, and so I was always cautioned not to necessarily label myself, but I find increasingly it's easier for me to describe what I do by putting a label on myself. And so I am a feminist political geographer, and so I am interested in power relationships and in how sort of how geopolitics are written on sites from the body to the global. And so I use food and agriculture as my venue into having, being able to ask questions about who has power and who benefits, and what those power relations look like. And so, yeah, I've gotten to do a lot of really cool things. So I worked with fair trade coffee farmers. I have done extensive research on genetically modified organisms, mostly in the context of food justice for my classroom. And I got to participate in a very open-minded forum that had a lot of different perspectives that was invited by Dave Kaplan, which was great. I also have done work on food sovereignty. And that's taken me to Basque Country in Spain and to Cuba, where people are, in very, very different ways, trying to have more control over how food is produced and how food moves through the system to consumers. And so that has led me to all kinds of fantastic conversations with people who are doing lots of different things, taking lots of different measures to create a food system that works for them, or that they're trying to make work for them. Long time ago, I did work on urban farming in the Pacific Northwest, particularly people who wanted to grow food in their backyards. And that's translated now to looking in Philadelphia, because I'm on the East Coast now, at sites of public fruit production. So with a student, I've been looking at edible forest gardens, which are sites of publicly available fruit in the city that people have planted fruit trees or vines that produce fruit or nuts, and anybody has access to them.
And these are public spaces?
They're public spaces. And so it's planted usually by volunteers. It's maintained entirely by volunteers. And if you want to pick something from the tree, you can. And that's something that's not unique to Philadelphia. There are movements across the United States to create sites of publicly available food. The food forest is something that people are seeing as maybe more permanent. So there's a lot of contention, I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear this, around land in urban areas.
Oh my God.
Yes, and so there's a lot of urban farming that happens. There's a lot of really excellent justice work that happens around urban farming by a number of different groups. That's been happening for a really long time. We have a very long history of urban food production in the United States, done by a number of different groups for a variety of reasons. It's getting more attention now, and especially as we see greening as being something that is attractive in a city. And so we see that people will come and gain access to land by whatever means. Usually it's precarious access to land. They don't hold the title, they don't, maybe they're not paying rent. But once that land is deemed valuable again, urban agriculture is seen as temporary. And so that land is then put to different use, and the farm or whatever food production that was happening there goes away. And they have to find another avenue. And so trees are seen as a little bit more permanent. I mean, we can cut down a tree. But these forest gardens are viewed as a way of staking claim to the land differently. And that has been pretty productive in places like LA, where a group called Fallen Fruit has been producing food forests. In Seattle, there's the Beacon Food Forest. There's in Boston, and Boston Tree Party is doing initiatives such as these. And really they are demonstrating that there are other ways that we can value land in the city, and that it doesn't just have to be for high-rise development or for housing or for parking, but that we can create sites of food access. Now, whether or not the people that are accessing the food or the people who need it the most is part of the inquiry that I'm working on with my student. And my student in particular, undergraduate student, excellent researcher, she's graduating this year. Oh, sorry about the mic. She is particularly interested in how policy influences this. And so Philadelphia has combined efforts to green the city with efforts to create food access. And so there are a number of NGOs that are working on this effort. And so we're working in particular with the Philadelphia Orchard Project, which is a nonprofit organization which helps groups set up edible forest sites. And we're trying to understand better who has access to these sites, who wants these sites, whether or not the green policies that Philadelphia is trying to put into practice are effective for creating opportunities to have urban agriculture and food forests, and whether or not that will be effective in the long run, whether or not it's sustainable. And what we're finding is that there's a little bit of a mismatch between greening places and the inequalities that we already see in the city, and that greening initiatives are starting to have a gentrifying effect. And we're not alone in doing this research. There's some excellent work that's been done by folks at Temple and other universities about what now is being called green gentrification. And so even as folks are planting publicly accessible fruit and vegetables, whether or not that's having a net positive effect on the communities that they're seeking to help is not known.
So we don't know if this model, in terms of these agriculturally productive forests in urban areas, is making an impact on marginalized populations in a positive way.
Right. Well, and I was even out, so the Philadelphia Orchard Project does a lot of community engagement. So in June, this is going to surprise you again, it's Juneberry season. And so the Philadelphia Orchard Project will go out because there are Juneberries planted all over Philadelphia. And I was out picking with them one day, and we're in the middle of an intersection in the triangle, and there were 3 Juneberry trees, also called serviceberry. And we were picking, and people didn't know that they could eat the fruit on the trees. And so it was this sort of site of education as people were using the crosswalks and saying, oh, what are you doing? And started eating berries with us and started picking them. And so that's kind of exciting to think about, oh, these trees are here, they already exist, but people aren't aware of them. And so there's maybe that educational standpoint, but there's so much more we could be doing to address inadequacies in access to food. So.
Indeed, reducing pavement might be one of them.
Reducing pavement, sure. Yeah, reducing reliance on the car, right? Making cities for people.
Well, it's a capital idea. As we're in our final couple of minutes here, I'm going to ask you to reflect on your life in geography. And you have not really an unusual path that many geographers have come from different fields and have pursued PhDs in geography and have said, my goodness, this is what I've been doing all the time. Yeah. So I'll ask you, as you think about these things, do you have any advice for aspiring undergraduates or even graduate students seeking to make a difference, seeking to engage in social justice or pursue an academic career in geography? Do you have any words of wisdom that you can lend?
Well, I mean, I really like being a geographer, and I really like to wave the flag for geography. And I'm always trying to recruit more people into the fold, because I think, especially right now, and I say this to my students, and to anyone really who will ask, especially right now, we need a better geographic understanding, because at all times we should be seeking to understand and explain difference rather than be afraid of it. And so for anyone who is going into the broader world, I feel like that's an important skill. And so for anyone who's an aspiring geographer, I think it's really about facing these questions in a hopeful way, and always trying to gather new knowledge, and to be a lifelong learner, I guess, is what I would say. And that's maybe not the kernel of wisdom. Take GIS classes. Maybe that's what I'm supposed to say.
Well,
fastest growing
I guess it's
employment sector. Yeah. But no, I think it's really important to be curious and to understand place. And so, I would encourage people to just continue to be hopeful and ask questions. And geography is a really good place to do that. So that would be my 2 cents about that.
Well, that's great. Lindsay, thank you so much for
thank you.
taking this time with us. And this concludes our session of Conversation with a Geographer. Thank you once again.
Thanks, I really appreciate you having me.